Welcome into another edition of the Leadership Library, hosted by CEO and author Rocky Romanella. Rocky is the author of the book Tighten the Lug Nuts, The Principles of Balanced Leadership, and has over 40 years of business experience as a prominent member of the UPS Supply Chain Solutions team, as well as the CEO of Unitech Global Services. So sit back, grab your notebook, and take a seat, and get ready for this edition of the Leadership Library.
Welcome to the Leadership Library. I'm your host, Rocky Romanella, and welcome for those of you who we've probably never described it this way to Season 4 of the Leadership Library podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Romanella. Today I want to talk about a very important concept. I like to call it the Great Barrier Reef. That great barrier is poor communication. Poor communication builds up such barriers between you and your people, you and your customers potentially. Good communication is so important both in your personal and professional life, your relationships in work, out work, your neighbors, friends, and family. So let's talk a little bit about communication and how do we break down that great barrier reef of poor communication. I think clearly you have to have a process. You have to develop a reliable process for communicating that fits your style. People see through when you're trying to be someone who you're not. And all of us have different communication styles. Some of us are more comfortable in one-on-one settings. Some are more comfortable in group settings. But ultimately, we have to be good in all of those settings. For me personally, I was a much better one-on-one communicator. I never viewed myself as a keynote speaker or a public speaker. But I recognized early in my career that in order for me to be effective, I was going to have to work at the communication skills that weren't in my core strengths. And so for me, I worked on those things. So for example, when I'm giving a keynote, I'm looking in the audience and I'm connecting with people on a one-on-one basis. So for me, I look at an audience, no matter how large it is, as a one-on-one conversation because I've got these sort of blinders on almost as I'm looking at individuals and watching their heads go up and down, believing, and I feel like I'm connecting. So all of us have to understand what our communication process is and how it fits our style. I think to be a good communicator, you first must have to understand your role as the leader, what you're trying to accomplish as the leader, and what do you expect of yourself and of your people. And I think that's so important because if you expect your people to be good communicators, then you have to work at being a good communicator. I think one of the things that I learned, and we all learned the hard way as we kind of grew up through the different organizations or went through our careers, is people want to hear from their direct supervisors and managers. While people love to have town hall meetings from CEOs or the vice presidents or presidents, nothing's more important than getting the information from the individuals who they report to. So I think it's important, no matter what level you are in an organization, you have a responsibility to communicate, and people want to hear from their boss. So don't ever discount how important it is for you to be that direct link of communication. I think you have to inspire openness and trust. I think what's openness and trust in communication? That you're willing to hear bad news. We've talked about that before. How do you deliver bad news and how you accept bad news? Well, as you're communicating, you're watching them. You're seeing, are light bulbs going off? Are they connecting dots? And if they're not, maybe you'll walk over to them later on, one-on-one. Hey, do you have any questions? Hopefully they trust you enough that they'll come knock on your door and say, hey, appreciate today's conversation, but I'm not quite sure I understand exactly what it is that you're asking us to do. You should embrace that kind of conversation because that lets you know that there's a disconnect. I think communication has to be part of your value system. It's so important to you. It's part of your core values that you work at it, you practice, you're prepared. You never take communication as, I don't need to be prepared, I don't need to practice, I don't need to make sure all my I's are dotted and T's are crossed. The minute you do that, you sort of disrespect communication as such an important part of who you are and what you stand for as a leader. So that's how you can break down that great barrier reef of poor communication and open up that waterway to success and open up those channels and those avenues for people to not only listen and learn from you, but give you that feedback you need as a leader. Thanks for listening. Once again, thank you so much for being part of the Leadership Library. I'm your host, Rocky Romanello.